So welcome back to this week's video. We're back on the beach for sunset this evening. Now we've spent pretty much the whole day here and just taking in what's happening, what the clouds doing, what the tide's doing, what the foreground looks like with the aim to come back this evening for sunset. And just now the clouds have rolled in all day. It's been quite fine. Earlier on we had streaks of high cloud just over the mountain here, and sort of hoping that that type of cloud would stick around, but it hasn't. We've got some thicker cloud that's moved in that's quite dark. The sun's just behind that cloud at the moment. Above it we've got that nice white fluffy cloud that usually catches the colour. So this beach here we've never been to before. I think this is Seilebost, and our first impressions earlier was it looks like the moon. So there's a build-up of what we think is sand in layers, in ledges, that on first look appears to be rock. But when you get closer to it, it's quite soft and crumbly. And I've never seen anything like that before, because you sort of start thinking, well, how does it just build up in that one place and not all along the beach? So there's patches of beach where you've got the stripes in the sand, the patterns, the channels, and then you've got the mix of loads of rocks and stones against these ledges of sand. And it almost looks like you could be walking on the surface of the moon. So at the moment it's low tide. It is so calm, very, very calm. We've got the light reflecting from those clouds onto the water. And earlier on today, the colours down here in the water were unreal. The turquoises and blues. Max flew the drone and we'll put a bit of footage up for you. But it was so vibrant because the sun was casting the light across the water. And obviously just now, because the sun's behind the cloud, you don't really see it the same. So it has a completely different feel. And I think probably tonight's video might be a little bit around some of the images that we took earlier today in sort of midday sun, where the colours were so vibrant, in comparison to then sunset, where it's a bit more subdued, a bit more muted in terms of the colour. But it doesn't mean that you can't come out and take images in the day and experiment. So again, we were focusing down and looking at what's on the sand, looking at the patterns again and the little things that are washed up, and you can create some different types of images just looking down at your feet. The light, the sun is going to come out there. I'm going to take a little shot here, just as that light comes from underneath the clouds. And probably I need to focus on this a little bit. But the other thing that we're doing slightly different tonight is that I've just put the 20mm prime on, and I'm not going to use any other lens at all. So if we need to move, it'll be with our feet, not with a zoom, and just look at what textures and what patterns that we can pick out in and amongst these ledges of sand. But yeah, gonna concentrate on what we're doing, and we'll catch up with you in a bit. Oh, it's so nice just bimbling around the sands and picking out little patterns. So this is one of the ledges of sand that I was just speaking about, where it just built up, and we were just sort of chatting around whether it's as the tide brings the sand in and then goes out, but it doesn't really explain to me how those layers of sand builds up. So I've taken 2 shots here, vertical and a landscape orientation, just to see which works best. And at the moment I'm undecided, but I've just placed the edge of this layer of sand looking out then towards the Harris Hills across. So just on this corner here is Luscantire. So we're sort of in the opposite direction at Seilebost looking across, and that cloud there now is looking amazing. We just can't see what's going on behind this little island, so not sure if there's a gap on the horizon that will help to light this cloud or not. But at the moment it's sort of almost like a moody sunset, even though in parts, in patches, it's still quite blue. So yeah, God knows what's going to happen. But it's nice, you know, because you could easily come down to the beach and think, the tide's out. You know, I think for me, foreground is a massive part of the images. And when we first came down this evening, compared to earlier on when the tide was in, our first sort of impressions were, it looks messy. How do you make any sense of all of this? You know, it's vast in terms of the rocks and the layers in between footprints and other things on the beach. How do you make sense of it? How do you try and keep a simple image? And I think it is just looking for these little compositions that you can just simplify without including everything else, and that's what we're looking for tonight. So although the conditions with the water, with the tides maybe aren't ideal, they're not optimum, because you know you can't sort of capture that movement, that lovely texture in the water that we love to capture. There is still things to photograph. So when we were down earlier on, there was out in the water, there was again these ledges of rock, and what I'd be interested to see is if we can now access them at low tide and try and get out a little bit further with that view. But we need to go and find it first just to see if it's there. But I can maybe see another shot just across again, using some of that ledge of this almost like sandstone, I'm going to call it, with that light maybe just before it disappears. So we'll put some images up for you that we have taken since getting onto the beach. I don't know if you're similar to me and sort of how I approach things, but when we get onto a location, I suppose, you look around and sort of, the first thing that caught my eye, I went to, got the phone out, was trying to look, can I make this work, and it didn't. So I think once you've taken an image or two, you start to sort of settle yourself a little bit and open yourself up then to looking at, oh, that might work, or let's just see if we can make something of this image. And I think that's the mindset that I'm in tonight, in terms of let's not just walk away because it's not doing what we want it to do. Let's see what we can make out of it. And there are some beautiful textures. So we'll go and explore, and we'll leave you with some footage and some images.
So we started the day by looking at how the light reflected onto the water, and I love how this created glass-like patterns. We looked for interest in the smaller details and photographed this lone piece of seaweed in the crystal clear waters with beautiful textures. I used a 100 to 400 to create these images where the sun reflected onto the water to bring out these incredible colours. I feel the images are more like paintings. I love how the lone person in this image creates a sense of scale but also tranquility. Even during the day there are opportunities to create images, even on blue sky days, and by looking down and trying something different, we were able to create our own version of our time at the beach.
Okay, so when I last spoke to you, the light just exploded as the sun came just underneath the clouds, lighting up the water and almost side lighting a little bit of those sand layers that we were talking about. Instinctively, light, there's light, and you try and take the shot. But actually shooting into the sun can be really challenging because you're trying not to blow the highlights while still getting your foreground correctly exposed. but I really like to get the image as correct as I can in camera without then sort of exposure blending or bringing other things in. Sometimes it's right to do that to get the shot, but what I did do was just move to the side, and instead of shooting directly into the sun, sort of almost turn the camera across so that we were getting some side light onto the ledges with the Harris Hills in the background. Tonight I'm just sort of feeling open to experimenting with what we've got, and hopefully that looks beautiful across. Hopefully we can come away with something nice, and if we do, absolutely fantastic. So there's just in front of us, we've got the sand patterns, very subtle sand patterns just leading down to the water's edge. And I think with this little bit of a gap of light we've got in the clouds there, hopefully it won't be too strong to try and get a shot. So we're going to try this. We've still not got out yet to the ledges. We need to try and see if we can find those. But super enjoying it. Didn't think initially when we came down we would enjoy it as much as we have, but look at that view. How can you grumble with a backdrop like this? Superb.
I tried to use foreground as much as possible during the evening, making sense of the shapes, rocks and patterns with the light reflecting onto the water. I feel the image on the left works better in black and white, and almost the sky mimics the lines in the sand. But trying to make sense of foreground and create a pleasing image was definitely a challenge. This image is one of my favourite from the evening, with the soft side light illuminating the sands and gentle tones. The simpler foreground I feel worked better.
So we've made our way up to what we think were the ledges that we saw earlier. Obviously the tide is a lot further out, so we're not quite sure if we're in the right place, but there's a huge area of that sandstone layering just in front of us, and that's where we were earlier. So I think we're in the right place, but nevertheless it's a nice little spot, because what we've got in the water here is all of these rocks, possibly maybe a build-up of sand, not sure, but they've got seaweed growing on them. So you've got the greens, almost muted greens of the seaweed just underneath the water. We've got a little bit of a hint of that turquoisey blue as well, which is nice, and almost a dramatic, moody sunset sky. So what I've done is I've put a 3-stop ND filter in, and that's giving me 15 seconds. I'm using a polarizer just to cut through and have a look at those beautiful rocks underneath, and just running a bit of a longer exposure just to try and smooth the water. And again, on the back of the camera, those rocks are creating that foreground interest with an absolutely beautiful backdrop there of the Harris Hills on the top third. What more could you want other than a seal swimming past, which it just did. It came right the way across, pretty close in, but with having the filters in, I wouldn't have got a sharp shot, and by the time I'd have even thought about getting the filters out to try and take an image, it would have gone, and it was. Max tried to get a little bit of footage, but it swam right to the other end of the beach. Hopefully it's going to come back. But an absolutely beautiful night, really lovely, calm. There's hardly anybody else on the beach. I think there's maybe 2 people at the far end of the beach, and there's nobody else except for me and Max. So it's just been lovely, a really nice evening. Perfect, absolutely perfect.
So I love how the light was breaking through the clouds and creating these incredible reflections on the water. The structures almost reminded me of the Northern Lights. This was my favourite image from the evening, with the beautiful colours in the foreground, dark midground with a moody sky. Really hope you've enjoyed the images from tonight's video.
So earlier today, while we were down at the beach, I went back into the water with the Adele's phone in one of the waterproof covers, and managed to have another go at taking some of the images underwater and trying to get that balance of underwater and just above with the hills in the background. We've got a couple maybe of images, and if they're any good, we'll put them on. If they're not any good, we won't put them on.
We will be putting them on. I think today's images were absolutely amazing. You know, the fact that it's only the second time that you've had a bash. Max had an underwater camera 20 years ago.
29 years ago.
And has been intrigued a little bit, haven't you?
Yeah.
And wanted to get back out. So that's been lovely to spend. We've about 8-9 hours we've been here today. But it's just been so chilled, so peaceful. We sat and had some tea.
Yep.
And just watched the world go by for a few hours, and it was just beautiful.
Yeah.
So to finish the evening tonight with a nice little sunset has been a dream. So what we'll do is we'll finish this week's video with some of Max's images, and
hopefully
no, we will. We'll finish the video with some of Max's images. So hope you've enjoyed our little look around Seilebost, otherwise known as Moon Beach. It's just otherworldly, very special. Lots of foreground interest. So yeah, we'll stop waffling. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. We'll see you next week. Adios.
So after having an underwater camera almost 30 years ago, it was great to feel inspired after speaking to Margaret Soraya. So I headed back into the water. These images were taken on the iPhone in a waterproof case. I hope you enjoyed the images as much as I enjoyed taking them, and just can't wait to have another opportunity to have a go. Thanks again, Margaret.